In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life moved at a slow, peaceful pace. The people there knew each other well, and everyone had a story to tell. Among them was an elderly man who lived alone in a modest house at the edge of the town. He was a quiet soul, often seen tending to his garden or sitting on his porch, watching the world go by. His name wasn't important, but his actions would soon become the talk of the town. The man had lived a simple life, working hard for decades in a factory before retiring. He had no family left, and his only companions were the birds that visited his garden and the occasional neighbor who stopped by to say hello. Despite his loneliness, he never complained. He found joy in the little things, the warmth of the sun on his face, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, and the kindness of strangers. One chilly autumn morning, as the man was walking to the local grocery store, he noticed a young boy sitting on the sidewalk. The boy looked no older than 10, his clothes worn and his face streaked with dirt. He was shivering, clutching a small, tattered backpack to his chest. The man stopped and knelt beside him. "Are you all right, son?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. I'm hungry," he whispered. "I haven't eaten in 2 days." The man's heart ached at the boy's words. Without hesitation, he took the boy's hand and led him to a nearby cafe. He ordered a warm meal for the boy and sat with him as he ate. The boy devoured the food, his hands trembling as he held the fork. When he was done, he looked at the man with gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. "No one's ever been this kind to me." The man smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You don't have to thank me, son. Everyone deserves a little kindness." As they talked, the man learned that the boy had run away from home. His parents were struggling with their own problems and hadn't noticed when he left. The boy had been wandering the streets, too scared to go back and too proud to ask for help. The man listened patiently, his heart heavy with sympathy. He knew he couldn't solve all the boy's problems, but he could offer him a safe place to stay for the night. The man took the boy to his home, giving him a warm bath and clean clothes. He made up a bed for him in the spare room and tucked him in, just as he would have done for his own child if he had one. As he sat by the boy's bedside, he felt a deep sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he felt needed. The next morning, the man took the boy to the local community center, where they helped families in need. He explained the boy's situation to the staff, who promised to reach out to his parents and offer support. The boy clung to the man's hand, reluctant to let go. "Will I see you again?" he asked, his voice trembling. The man knelt down and looked the boy in the eye. "Of course, you will," he said with a warm smile. "You're always welcome at my house. Anytime you need a friend, I'll be here." The boy nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. He hugged the man tightly before being led away by a social worker. The man watched him go, his heart full of mixed emotions. He knew the boy's journey was far from over, but he was glad he could offer him a moment of comfort in a difficult time. Word of the man's kindness spread quickly through the town. People began to see him in a new light, not just as the quiet old man who lived on the edge of town, but as someone who had a heart of gold. Neighbors started stopping by his house more often, bringing him homemade meals and inviting him to community events. The man, who had once felt invisible, now felt a sense of belonging. But this was only the beginning of the story. The man's simple act of kindness would set off a chain reaction, touching the lives of many and reminding everyone in the town of the power of compassion. Little did he know, his actions would soon bring the entire community together in a way no one could have predicted. As the days turned into weeks, the man continued to live his quiet life, but with a newfound sense of purpose. He began to notice others who were struggling, an elderly woman who needed help carrying her groceries, a young mother who couldn't afford diapers for her baby, a homeless man who slept on a bench in the park. Each time, he stepped in, offering whatever help he could. His small acts of kindness began to ripple through the town, inspiring others to do the same. The man didn't think much of it. To him, it was just the right thing to do. But to everyone else, he was a hero. And as the town came together, united by his example, they realized that sometimes, the simplest acts of kindness can change the world. The man's small acts of kindness didn't go unnoticed. The townspeople, inspired by his selflessness, began to look for ways to help one another. It started with small gestures, a neighbor offering to mow an elderly couple's lawn, a shopkeeper giving a discount to a struggling family, a group of teenagers organizing a food drive for the local shelter. The town, once quiet and reserved, was now buzzing with a sense of community and warmth. One day, as the man was walking home from the grocery store, he noticed a crowd gathered near the town square. Curious, he made his way over and saw a young woman standing on a makeshift stage, speaking passionately into a microphone. She was talking about the struggles of the homeless population in their town and how they needed more support. The man listened intently, his heart heavy with concern. After her speech, the woman stepped down from the stage, and the crowd began to disperse. The man approached her, his hands clutching the straps of his grocery bag. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I heard what you said, and I'd like to help." The woman turned to him, her eyes lighting up with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "We're trying to organize a shelter for the winter, but we don't have enough resources. Any help would mean the world." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I don't have much, but I can donate some blankets and food. And I can volunteer my time." The woman smiled warmly. "That's more than enough. Thank you so much." Over the next few weeks, the man became deeply involved in the effort to build the shelter. He spent his days collecting donations, organizing supplies, and helping to renovate an old building that would serve as the shelter. The townspeople, inspired by his dedication, joined in as well. What started as a small project soon grew into a community-wide effort. One cold evening, as the shelter was nearing completion, the man was working late, painting the walls of the main room. The young woman from the town square walked in, carrying a thermos of hot tea. "You've been working so hard," she said, handing him the thermos. "Take a break. You've done more than anyone could ask for." The man accepted the tea with a grateful smile. "I just want to make sure everyone has a warm place to stay this winter," he said. "No one should have to sleep out in the cold." The woman sat down beside him, her eyes filled with admiration. "You've inspired so many people," she said. "This town hasn't felt this united in years. It's all because of you." The man shook his head humbly. "It's not just me. Everyone has come together to make this happen. I'm just doing my part." As the shelter opened its doors for the first time, the man stood outside, watching as people filed in, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had played a part in making their lives a little easier. But his work wasn't done yet. One night, as he was volunteering at the shelter, he noticed a familiar face among the crowd. It was the young boy he had helped months ago. The boy's eyes lit up when he saw the man, and he ran over to him, wrapping his arms around him in a tight hug. "You're here," the boy exclaimed. The man knelt down, his heart swelling with emotion. "I'm so glad to see you," he said. "How have you been?" The boy's smile faded slightly. "Things are still hard at home," he admitted. "But it's better now. My parents are getting help, and they're trying their best." The man placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's all anyone can do," he said gently. "I'm proud of you for being so strong." The boy looked up at him, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You're the reason I didn't give up," he said. "You showed me that there are still good people in the world." The man felt a lump form in his throat. He pulled the boy into another hug, holding him tightly. "You're never alone," he whispered. Remember that. As the weeks went by, the man continued to visit the shelter, spending time with the boy and the other residents. He listened to their stories, offered words of encouragement, and did whatever he could to make their lives a little brighter. The townspeople, inspired by his unwavering compassion, followed his lead, creating a network of support that extended far beyond the shelter. One day, the local newspaper caught wind of the man's story. A reporter came to interview him, asking him what had motivated him to help so many people. The man thought for a moment before answering. "I've lived a long life," he said. "And I've learned that the most important thing we can do is care for one another. It doesn't take much to make a difference, just a little kindness." The article was published the following week, and soon, the man's story spread beyond the town. People from neighboring communities reached out, offering donations and volunteering their time. The shelter grew, and so did the sense of unity among the townspeople. But the man remained humble, never seeking recognition or praise. To him, the greatest reward was seeing the smiles on the faces of those he had helped. He continued to live his simple life, tending to his garden and sitting on his porch, but now, he was surrounded by friends and neighbors who had become like family. As the winter turned to spring, the town held a celebration to honor the man and the community's efforts. The town square was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of food cooking on grills. The man sat at a table, surrounded by people who had been touched by his kindness. The young boy he had helped sat beside him, his face beaming with joy. The young woman from the shelter stood up to make a speech. "We're here today to celebrate the power of kindness," she said. "And to thank the man who reminded us all of what it means to be human. He showed us that even the smallest acts of compassion can change lives." The crowd erupted into applause, and the man felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. He stood up, holding up his hands to quiet the crowd. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "But this isn't about me. It's about all of us. We've shown that when we come together, we can make the world a better place." As the celebration continued, the man looked around at the faces of the people he had come to love. He realized that his simple act of kindness had sparked something much bigger, a movement of compassion and unity that would continue to grow long after he was gone. And as the sun set over the town, casting a warm golden glow over the square, the man felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that he had made a difference, not just in the lives of those he had helped, but in the heart of the entire community. The celebration in the town square marked a turning point for the community. The man's story had become a symbol of hope and unity, and people from all walks of life were inspired to carry forward his legacy of kindness. But for the man himself, life continued much as it always had, quiet, simple, and filled with small, meaningful moments. One morning, as he was tending to his garden, he noticed a car pull up to the curb. A woman stepped out, holding a young child by the hand. She looked hesitant, as if unsure whether she should approach. The man wiped his hands on his apron and walked over, offering a warm smile. "Can I help you?" he asked. The woman nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. I heard about what you've been doing for the community," she said. "And I was wondering if you could help me. I'm a single mother, and I've been struggling to make ends meet. I don't know where else to turn." The man listened intently, his heart going out to her. "Of course," he said gently. "Come inside. Let's see what we can do." He led the woman and her child into his home, offering them a seat at his kitchen table. He poured them each a glass of water and sat down across from them. "Tell me more about your situation," he said. The woman explained that she had lost her job and was struggling to pay rent. She had no family to turn to and was afraid she and her child would end up on the streets. The man listened without judgment, his mind already working on ways to help. "First things first," he said. "You and your child need a safe place to stay. I have a spare room here, and you're welcome to use it for as long as you need." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I can't ask you to do that," she said. "You've already done so much for so many people." The man shook his head. "You're not asking. I'm offering. And it's not a burden, it's what we do for each other." Over the next few days, the man helped the woman get back on her feet. He connected her with local resources, helped her update her resume, and even watched her child while she went to job interviews. The townspeople, hearing about her situation, rallied around her as well. One neighbor offered her a part-time job at their bakery, while another donated clothes and toys for her child. The woman was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "I don't know how to thank you all," she said one evening, as she sat with the man on his porch. "I didn't think there were still people like you in the world." The man smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "There are more good people out there than you think," he said. "Sometimes, they just need a little nudge to show their kindness." As the weeks went by, the woman found a stable job and was able to move into a small apartment with her child. Before she left, she hugged the man tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You've changed my life," she said. "I'll never forget what you've done for us." The man patted her back gently. "You've changed my life too," he said. "Seeing you and your child happy is all the thanks I need." The woman's story became another chapter in the town's growing narrative of compassion. People began to see that kindness wasn't just about grand gestures, it was about the small, everyday acts that made a difference in someone's life. The man's example had shown them that everyone had the power to make a positive impact, no matter how big or small. One day, the man received a letter in the mail. It was from a young man who had grown up in the town but had moved away years ago. The letter was filled with gratitude, thanking the man for the kindness he had shown him when he was a child. "You may not remember me," the letter read, "but I'll never forget you. You were the one who taught me that no matter how hard life gets, there's always hope. Because of you, I've tried to live my life with kindness and compassion. Thank you for showing me the way." The man read the letter several times, his heart swelling with emotion. He had never sought recognition for his actions, but knowing that he had made a lasting impact on someone's life filled him with a deep sense of fulfillment. As the seasons changed, the man continued to live his quiet life, but now, he was surrounded by a community that had been transformed by his example. The shelter he had helped build was thriving, providing a safe haven for those in need. The townspeople had formed a network of support, looking out for one another and offering help wherever it was needed. One evening, as the man sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the hills, he felt a sense of peace and contentment. He knew that his time on earth was limited, but he also knew that the kindness he had shown would live on in the hearts of those he had touched. The young boy he had helped months ago came running up the path, his face beaming with excitement. "Guess what?" he said, holding up a piece of paper. "I got an A on my math test." The man smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." The boy sat down beside him, swinging his legs over the edge of the porch. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I grow up, I want to be just like you. I want to help people and make the world a better place." The man felt a lump form in his throat. He put an arm around the boy's shoulders, pulling him close. "You already are," he said. "You've got a kind heart, and that's the most important thing." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the man and the boy sat together in comfortable silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. The man knew that his journey wasn't over, there were still people who needed help, still lives that could be touched by kindness. And as long as he had the strength, he would continue to do what he had always done, care for others, one small act at a time. The man's life had become a quiet symphony of small, meaningful moments. Each day brought new opportunities to help others, and he embraced them with the same humility and dedication that had always defined him. The town, now united by his example, continued to flourish, its people looking out for one another in ways they never had before. One crisp winter morning, as the man was walking to the community center, he noticed a group of children playing in the park. They were laughing and chasing each other, their breath visible in the cold air. Among them was the young boy he had helped months ago, now looking healthier and happier than ever. The man smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had played a small part in giving that boy a chance at a better life, and that was enough. As he entered the community center, he was greeted by the young woman who had organized the shelter. She was busy coordinating volunteers for a new project, a free meal program for the elderly and those who couldn't afford to feed themselves. "We're expecting a big turnout today," she said, handing him a stack of flyers. "Can you help spread the word?" The man nodded, taking the flyers without hesitation. "Of course," he said. "I'll start with the neighborhoods near the park." As he walked through the town, knocking on doors and handing out flyers, he was struck by how much had changed. People greeted him with smiles and warm words, eager to help in any way they could. The sense of community was palpable, and it filled him with hope. When he returned to the community center later that afternoon, the place was buzzing with activity. Volunteers were setting up tables, preparing food, and organizing donations. The man rolled up his sleeves and joined in, doing whatever needed to be done. As the first guests began to arrive, he greeted them with the same kindness and respect he showed everyone. Among the guests was an elderly woman who walked with a cane. She looked frail and tired, but her eyes lit up when she saw the man. "I remember you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You helped my grandson when he was in trouble. I never got the chance to thank you." The man smiled, taking her hand gently. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm just glad I could help." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You've done more than help," she said. "You've given us hope. And that's something we'll never forget." As the meal program continued, the man moved from table to table, chatting with the guests and making sure everyone felt welcome. He listened to their stories, offered words of encouragement, and did whatever he could to make their day a little brighter. It was a simple act, but it meant the world to those he touched. Later that evening, as the volunteers were cleaning up, the young woman approached the man. "You've done so much for this community," she said. "We'd like to do something for you in return." The man shook his head, his expression humble. "I don't need anything," he said. "Seeing everyone come together like this is all the reward I need." But the woman was persistent. "Please," she said. "Let us show our gratitude. You've inspired us all, and we want to honor you." The man thought for a moment before nodding reluctantly. "All right," he said. "But only if it's something simple." The woman smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Don't worry," she said. "It'll be a surprise." Over the next few days, the town buzzed with secret preparations. The man noticed people whispering and exchanging knowing glances, but he didn't ask questions. He trusted that whatever they were planning, it would come from the heart. On the day of the surprise, the man was asked to come to the town square. As he approached, he was greeted by a crowd of people, all smiling and clapping. In the center of the square was a small stage, decorated with flowers and banners. The young woman from the community center stood on the stage, holding a microphone. "We're here today to honor someone very special," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Someone who has shown us the true meaning of kindness and compassion. Someone who has reminded us that even the smallest acts of love can change the world." The crowd erupted into applause as the man was led to the stage. He stood there, feeling a mix of embarrassment and gratitude, as the woman continued. "We may not be able to repay you for all that you've done," she said, "but we can show you how much you mean to us." She handed him a small box, wrapped in simple brown paper. The man opened it carefully, revealing a handmade quilt. Each square of the quilt was stitched by a different person in the town, their names embroidered in the corners. It was a beautiful, heartfelt gift, and the man felt tears welling up in his eyes. "This quilt represents the love and gratitude we all feel for you," the woman said. "Each stitch is a reminder of the lives you've touched and the kindness you've shown." The man held the quilt to his chest, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Thank you," he said. "This means more to me than words can express. But the real gift is seeing all of you come together, caring for one another and making this town a better place. That's what truly matters." The crowd cheered, their applause echoing through the square. The man stood there, surrounded by the people he had come to love, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that his journey wasn't over, there were still people who needed help, still lives that could be touched by kindness. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself to bask in the warmth of the community he had helped create. As the celebration continued, the man sat on the stage, the quilt draped over his shoulders. People came up to him, one by one, sharing their stories and expressing their gratitude. Each interaction was a reminder of the impact he had made, not through grand gestures, but through simple, everyday acts of kindness. The young boy he had helped months ago climbed onto the stage, holding a small drawing. "I made this for you," he said, handing it to the man. The drawing depicted the man standing in a field of flowers, surrounded by smiling faces. At the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "Thank you for being our hero." The man felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at the drawing. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll treasure it always." The boy smiled, his eyes shining with admiration. "You're the best," he said, hugging the man tightly. As the sun set over the town square, casting a warm golden glow over the crowd, the man felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that his time on earth was limited, but he also knew that the kindness he had shown would live on in the hearts of those he had touched. And as long as that kindness continued to spread, his legacy would never fade. The celebration in the town square had left the man feeling deeply moved, but also reflective. He knew that the quilt and the kind words were not just gifts for him, they were symbols of the community's collective spirit, a spirit he had helped nurture but one that now thrived on its own. As the days turned into weeks, the man continued his quiet acts of kindness, but he also began to notice something remarkable: the town no longer needed him to lead the way. People were stepping up on their own, inspired by his example but driven by their own desire to make a difference. One afternoon, as the man was walking through the park, he saw a group of teenagers cleaning up litter. They were laughing and joking as they worked, but their efforts were sincere. One of them noticed the man and waved him over. "Hey, we're trying to make the park nicer for everyone," the teenager said. "Do you have any tips?" The man smiled, touched by their initiative. "You're doing a great job already," he said. "But if you want to make a bigger impact, you could organize a community cleanup day. Get more people involved." The teenagers' eyes lit up with excitement. "That's a great idea," one of them said. "We'll start planning it right away." The man watched as they huddled together, brainstorming ideas and assigning tasks. He felt a swell of pride, knowing that the next generation was carrying forward the values he had helped instill. It was a reminder that kindness wasn't just about individual acts, it was about creating a culture where compassion and generosity became second nature. As the weeks went by, the town continued to flourish. The community cleanup day was a huge success, with people of all ages coming together to beautify the park. The free meal program at the community center expanded, offering not just food but also companionship and support to those in need. The shelter he had helped build was now a hub of activity, providing not just a place to sleep but also resources to help people get back on their feet. The man's role in all of this had become less visible, but no less important. He was no longer the sole driving force behind the town's kindness, he was now part of a larger movement, one that had taken on a life of its own. And that, he realized, was the true measure of success. One day, as he was sitting on his porch, the young boy he had helped months ago came running up the path. "Guess what?" the boy said, his face beaming with excitement. We're starting a kindness club at school. It was my idea, and everyone wants to join. The man's heart swelled with pride. That's wonderful, he said. What will your club do? The boy sat down beside him, swinging his legs over the edge of the porch. We're going to do things like help kids with their homework, clean up the schoolyard, and visit the elderly, he said. We want to make the school a better place for everyone. The man smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. I'm so proud of you, he said. You're going to do amazing things. The boy looked up at him, his eyes shining with determination. I want to be like you, he said. I want to help people and make the world a better place. The man felt a lump form in his throat. You already are, he said. And you're going to do even more. I know it. As the boy ran off to join his friends, the man sat back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that his time on earth was limited, but he also knew that the kindness he had shown would live on in the hearts of those he had touched. And as long as that kindness continued to spread, his legacy would never fade. But life, as always, had its challenges. One evening, as the man was walking home from the community center, he noticed a figure sitting on a bench near the park. It was a young man, his head bowed and his shoulders slumped. The man approached him cautiously, sensing that something was wrong. Are you all right? He asked gently. The young man looked up, his eyes filled with despair. I don't know, he said. I've lost everything. My job, my home, my family. I don't know what to do. The man sat down beside him, his heart heavy with sympathy. I'm so sorry, he said. But you're not alone. There are people here who can help you. The young man shook his head. I don't deserve help, he said. I've made so many mistakes. The man placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. We all make mistakes, he said. But that doesn't mean we don't deserve kindness. Let me help you. Over the next few days, the man worked tirelessly to help the young man get back on his feet. He connected him with resources at the shelter, helped him find a temporary job, and even offered him a place to stay. The young man was hesitant at first, but the man's unwavering compassion slowly began to break down his walls. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, the young man turned to the man, his eyes filled with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You've given me a second chance. The man smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You don't have to thank me, he said. Just promise me one thing, when you're back on your feet, help someone else. That's all the thanks I need. The young man nodded, his expression serious. I will, he said. I promise. As the weeks went by, the young man began to rebuild his life. He found a stable job, reconnected with his family, and even started volunteering at the shelter. The man watched with pride as the young man transformed, his despair replaced by hope and determination. But the man's own health was beginning to decline. He had been feeling increasingly tired and weak, but he brushed it off, focusing instead on the needs of others. It wasn't until one morning, when he collapsed while tending to his garden, that he realized something was seriously wrong. The townspeople rallied around him, just as he had always done for them. They took him to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with a serious illness. The news was devastating, but the man remained calm and composed. I've lived a good life, he said. And I've been blessed to see the impact of kindness. That's all I could ever ask for. As he lay in his hospital bed, surrounded by the people he had touched, the man felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that his journey was coming to an end, but he also knew that the kindness he had shown would live on in the hearts of those he had touched. And as long as that kindness continued to spread, his legacy would never fade. The news of the man's illness spread quickly through the town, leaving a somber cloud over the community that had once been so vibrant with hope and unity. People who had been touched by his kindness, neighbors, friends, strangers he had helped, came to visit him in the hospital. They brought flowers, cards, and homemade meals, but more than anything, they brought their gratitude. Each visitor had a story to share, a moment when the man's simple act of kindness had changed their lives. The young boy he had helped months ago came to see him every day after school. He would sit by the man's bedside, telling him about the kindness club at school and all the good they were doing. "We're helping so many people now," the boy said one afternoon, his voice filled with pride. "Just like you taught us." The man smiled weakly, his hand resting on the boy's. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "You're going to do amazing things." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want you to go," he whispered. "We still need you." The man squeezed the boy's hand gently. "You don't need me anymore," he said. "You've got everything you need right here." He tapped the boy's chest, over his heart. "Kindness starts here. And you've got more than enough to keep it going." The young woman who had organized the shelter also visited often. She would update him on the community's progress, sharing stories of how the town continued to come together. "The shelter is thriving," she said one evening. "And the free meal program is feeding more people than ever. It's all because of you." The man shook his head, his voice soft but firm. "It's because of all of you," he said. "I just planted a seed. You're the ones who made it grow." Even the young man he had helped off the streets came to see him, bringing his family along. "I wouldn't be here without you," the young man said, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved my life." The man smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "You saved yourself," he said. "I just gave you a little push. Now it's your turn to help others." As the days passed, the man grew weaker, but his spirit remained strong. He spent his time reflecting on his life, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the people he had met and the lives he had touched. He knew his time was running out, but he wasn't afraid. He had lived a life filled with purpose, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun set outside his hospital window, the man asked to speak to the young woman who had organized the shelter. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand as he spoke. "I want you to promise me something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anything," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Keep the kindness alive," he said. "Don't let it fade. It's not about me, it's about all of you. As long as you care for one another, I'll always be here." The woman nodded, her voice trembling. "I promise," she said. "We'll never forget what you've taught us." The man closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "That's all I needed to hear." That night, the man passed away quietly in his sleep. The news of his death spread through the town like a ripple, leaving a profound sense of loss in its wake. But even in their grief, the townspeople found comfort in the legacy he had left behind. They gathered in the town square, sharing stories and memories of the man who had changed their lives. The young boy stood on the stage, holding a small drawing he had made of the man. "He was my hero," the boy said, his voice shaking. "He showed me that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. And I promised to keep his kindness alive." The young woman who had organized the shelter also spoke, her voice filled with emotion. "He taught us that kindness isn't about grand gestures, it's about the little things we do every day. It's about caring for one another, even when it's hard. And it's about never giving up, no matter how dark things seem." As the townspeople listened, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. The man may have been gone, but his spirit lived on in each of them. They vowed to honor his memory by continuing his work, by spreading kindness wherever they could. In the weeks that followed, the town came together in ways they never had before. They organized a memorial garden in the park, planting flowers and trees in the man's honor. They expanded the shelter and the free meal program, ensuring that no one in the community would ever go hungry or without a place to sleep. And they continued to look out for one another, offering help and support to those in need. The Young Boys' Kindness Club at school grew, with more and more students joining to make a difference. They organized fundraisers, cleaned up the schoolyard, and visited the elderly, spreading joy wherever they went. The boy knew that the man would have been proud, and he made sure to tell everyone about the man who had inspired him. The young man who had once been homeless also kept his promise. He volunteered at the shelter, helping others who were struggling just as he had. He shared his story, offering hope and encouragement to those who felt lost. And he never forgot the man who had given him a second chance. As the seasons changed, the town continued to thrive, united by the man's legacy of kindness. People from neighboring communities heard about the man's story and were inspired to start their own initiatives, creating a ripple effect that spread far beyond the town's borders. And though the man was no longer there to see it, his spirit lived on in every act of kindness, every smile, and every helping hand. He had shown the town that even the smallest acts of compassion could change the world, and they would never forget that lesson. The town had changed in ways no one could have imagined. What had once been a quiet, unremarkable place was now a beacon of hope and kindness, all because of one man's selfless actions. Though he was no longer physically present, his spirit was everywhere, in the laughter of children playing in the park, in the warm meals served at the community center, and in the helping hands that reached out to those in need. His legacy had become a living, breathing part of the town, and it showed no signs of fading. 1 year after the man's passing, the town held a special gathering in his honor. The memorial garden in the park had blossomed into a beautiful, peaceful space, filled with flowers, benches, and a small plaque that read, "In memory of a man who taught us that kindness changes everything." People from all over the community came to pay their respects, sharing stories and memories of the man who had touched their lives. The young boy, now a little older and wiser, stood in front of the crowd, holding a small notebook. "I've been writing down all the ways we've kept his kindness alive," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And there are so many stories. Like the time we helped rebuild a neighbor's fence after a storm, or when we collected toys for kids who didn't have any, or when we just sat with someone who was feeling lonely. Every time we do something kind, it's like he's still here with us." The crowd listened in silence, many wiping away tears. The boy's words were a reminder that the man's legacy wasn't just about the big things, it was about the small, everyday acts of compassion that added up to something extraordinary. The young woman who had organized the shelter also spoke, her voice filled with gratitude. "He showed us that kindness isn't about one person, it's about all of us," she said. "It's about coming together as a community and caring for one another. And that's exactly what we've done. The shelter, the meal program, the kindness club, they're all proof that his spirit lives on." As the gathering continued, people shared their own stories of how the man had inspired them. A mother talked about how the kindness club at school had helped her shy daughter come out of her shell. A shopkeeper shared how the community's support had helped him keep his business afloat during tough times. And the young man who had once been homeless stood up, his voice trembling as he spoke. "He gave me a second chance," he said. "And now I'm doing my best to give that same chance to others." That's what he would have wanted. The stories went on for hours, each one a testament to the man's enduring impact. By the end of the gathering, there wasn't a dry eye in the park. But amidst the tears, there was also a sense of hope and determination. The man may have been gone, but his message was alive and well. In the months that followed, the town continued to thrive. The kindness club at the school grew even larger, with students organizing new projects and initiatives. The shelter expanded its services, offering not just a place to sleep but also job training and counseling. And the free meal program became a hub of connection, where people from all walks of life could come together and share a meal. But the man's influence didn't stop at the town's borders. News of his story had spread far and wide, inspiring people in other communities to start their own kindness initiatives. A neighboring town opened a shelter modeled after the one he had helped build. A school district started a kindness curriculum, teaching students the importance of compassion and empathy. And a national charity launched a campaign in his honor, encouraging people to perform simple acts of kindness in their own communities. The man's story had become a movement, one that showed no signs of slowing down. And though he wasn't there to see it, those who had known him felt his presence in every act of kindness, every smile, and every helping hand. One evening, as the sun set over the memorial garden, the young boy sat on a bench, flipping through his notebook. He had filled it with stories of kindness, each one a reminder of the man who had inspired him. As he read through the pages, he felt a sense of peace and purpose. He knew that the man's legacy was in good hands, not just his, but everyone's. The young woman from the shelter joined him on the bench, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He would be so proud of you," she said. "You've done so much to keep his kindness alive." The boy smiled, closing the notebook. "It's not just me," he said. "It's all of us. And as long as we keep caring for each other, he'll always be here." The two sat in silence for a while, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the hills. The garden was quiet, but it was a peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that comes from knowing you're part of something bigger than yourself. As they got up to leave, the boy noticed a small flower growing near the bench. It was a simple, unremarkable flower, but it was thriving, its petals reaching toward the sky. He knelt down to take a closer look, a smile spreading across his face. "What is it?" the young woman asked. The boy stood up, his eyes shining. "It's like him," he said. "Small, but strong. And it's making the world a little more beautiful." The young woman smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "That's exactly what he did," she said. "And that's exactly what we'll keep doing." As they walked out of the garden, the boy took one last look at the flower, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He knew that the man's kindness would continue to grow, just like that flower, spreading its roots and touching more lives than anyone could have imagined. And as long as there were people willing to care for one another, the man's legacy would never fade. It would live on in every act of kindness, every smile, and every helping hand, a reminder that even the smallest acts of love can change the world.